Hello students, welcome to the final semester of your UG course, your sixth semester. We have about 5 or 6 papers in this semester, and one of the papers in which I have a few topics to discuss with you is American and Postcolonial Literatures. As the title indicates, it's a paper that helps us to understand the growth and size of English literature. We realize that English literature is not the literature that is produced within the borders of that tiny island called England or that region called Great Britain. English literatures have their presence in various parts of the world, in parts and regions of the world that had at one point of time been colonies of Great Britain. So today, English literature is naturally made up of works from different parts of the world, and you probably have a greater variety and greater depth and greater richness being contributed to English literature from areas that were at one point of time colonies of England. If you were asked to name the major English writers today, I'm sure at least some of them would be writers like Salman Rushdie and others who are not strictly English people. Well, the author that I have chosen to discuss the many-sidedness of English literature today is an American-Canadian writer named Carol Ann Shields. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this writer, but she is significant. She's won some of the major literary awards instituted by Canada, a country which became her home after she moved to Canada following her marriage, and when she moved to this new country from America, which was the country of her birth, she took up Canadian citizenship. She did not come to the field of writing until a very ripe old age. In fact, it was quite late in life that she made a beginning as a writer. She has stated in her interviews that it was to devote time to her family, consisting of her husband and 3 daughters, that she decided to, give this urge to write a secondary position. And it was only after her family was more or less settled, the 3 daughters were more or less settled, that she decided to begin her career as a writer. But when she did make a beginning as a writer, there was actually no looking back. And she made her mark as a novelist, as a major short story writer, as a playwright, and as a poet too. She's also written quite a well-known biography of Jane Austen. Some of her well-known novels are Small Ceremonies and Unless, but it is mainly as a short story writer that she is today largely remembered. And she is remembered not for any great epic novels or any path-breaking short stories. What is unique about her works is that she has depicted in a very unique manner ordinary lives. She has this great ability to present the most complex of matters in a rather light-hearted manner. Now, this can be seen as the unique stamp of her works. Uh, you can explore all her works and you will find that she has restricted herself as a writer to the field that she knew best, and that was the domestic world. She did not have the kind of exposure to the world, big world outside, the big financial world, the commercial world, the world of politics, or the world of wars and other such, mighty events and situations. No, she was most familiar with the domestic world, and when she wrote, she chose to write about that which she knew best. So she explores the everyday triumphs and the tragedies of ordinary lives, particularly the lives of women. As some critic has rightly stated, she is a writer who highlighted the profundity of the mundane or the ordinary. Even that has its own depth, its own richness, and that is what she has captured in her works. And I think the story that has been prescribed for our study, Scarf, is one that gives us an insight into this aspect of Carol Shields' work. So you can read the story. I have added the link to a PDF copy of this story. I'm sure you have it in your textbook too. Most of you would have got the copy of the textbook. In any case, do read the story and we'll discuss it in the next class. Okay? It is a story that tells us about a writer named Rita Winters. And the whole story is about a journey that Rita Winters undertakes when she wins a major prize for a novel that she has written. The title of the novel is My Time Is Up. It did considerably well when it was published, and her publishers were quite delighted, and they sent her on a book promotion tour to some of the major cities of America. Rita Winters belonged to a little town called Lancaster, and from there she proceeds to Washington, to to Baltimore, and New York, and this is where the events of the story are set. She has she spends a good deal of her time in one of the cities buying a scarf for Nora, her daughter. And what this scarf begins to, or what the scarf turns out to be when she has a meeting with her friend Gwendolyn in the third city is what the story is all about. So please do read the story. Read the way in which she discovers the scarf that she had been looking for and what her friend Gwendolyn does when she sees the scarf. We'll discuss the story in the next class. The story Scarf tells us about a writer named Rita Winters. Now, Rita Winters appears in other works of the writer Carol Shields, especially a novel titled Unless. In that, we have the story of Rita Winters and her daughters and some of the challenges that they face. But here in the story, in Scarf, we have another part of Rita Winters' life. It is when she writes a novel called My Time's Up, and it wins a prize called the Offended Prize. Now, Rita, apart from being a writer herself, also works as an editor for a major writer named Danielle Westerman. Danielle Westerman is a Holocaust survivor, and her works, which are considered major works, are mostly about the Holocaust and war in general. But Rita Winters mainly writes about, the domestic world, the world that she herself is most familiar with, very much like the author Carol Shields, whose works also deal with these domestic everyday themes. Rita Winters writes in her works, in her novels about uh, the ordinary domestic life of, particularly of women. So, what has she won the prize for? She's won the prize for a novel titled My Time's Up. Time is, I'm sure you know, a kind of spice, an aromatic spice. നമ്മൾ കുക്കിങ്ങിനൊക്കെ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന ഒരു aromatic spice. And we have in this novel the story of a couple named Alicia and her husband, Roman. They have some issues in their marriage, and there is a point of time when Alicia contemplates a suicide. She wants to end her life, but at the end, she suddenly sees the sight of her thyme seeds sprouting. And that sign of new life becomes very inspiring for her, and she decides to continue to live. And the novel ends on a happy note. There is a play upon the title time. There was a time when she was extremely sad. She could be heard singing the song My Time Is Up, Time, time, where she says, her time is up and she's about to die. But when she sees the thyme seeds having sprouted, she feels inspired. She decides to live, and the novel ends happily. It's a very good, feel good romance. And that's why everyone is kind of surprised that the novel did quite well, that people were buying the novel, and that there were good reviews even in some of the leading journals and magazines and newspapers. Everyone's surprised, but yeah, that it's something that her husband and the three daughters uh, feel very excited about, especially when they are mentioned. The three daughters are mentioned in a review about the book written in a newspaper. Naturally, all the newspapers, highlight the fact that this is a novel written by a not so well known person named Rita Winters. She's constantly referred to as Mrs. Winters. അതായത് അവരുടെ marital status, her life as a mother, her life as a wife, her life as a small town lady living in a place called Lancaster. That is what is highlighted, which is why everyone is surprised. Now, who would want to buy this kind of a novel? It seems rather old-fashioned. ഇന്നത്തെ കാലത്ത് ഒരു novel പോലെയല്ല. It seems rather old-fashioned. So why are people buying it? And that's why people are generally surprised about the good sales of the book. Anyway, that makes the publishers quite happy because their book is being sold. Whatever its quality, they're happy that the book is being sold. Now, something about the Offenden prize. It comes with a prize money, and Rita Winters is naturally quite happy to get the prize. This is a prize that is instituted by a couple named Clarence and Dorothy Offenden, and the motto of this award is the Offended Prize recognizes literary quality and honors accessibility. It makes it very clear that it rates as good only those works which can be read and understood by everyone. The recipe for enduring fiction, according to this couple, is the work should have a proper beginning, a middle, and an end. അതായത് ഒരു conventional story. It's in conventional stories that we have that normal linear mode of narration. It begins at a particular point and then it proceeds to a middle and then it reaches a fine conclusion. That's how normal conventional works are written. And in an age of newfangled writing, in an age of experimental writing, in an age of stream of consciousness and other new kinds of narrative techniques, these people, Clarence and Dorothy Offenden, they prefer to stick to conventional works, and that is why they have instituted this prize, so that such writers, writers who write conventional works, may be recognized. So, Rita Winters attends the awards ceremony in New York with her family. And then on her own, she travels to Washington, where the publishers have put her up in a writer suite in a hotel, and it's a special privilege. It's part of the package that they have given her. And when she checks into the room, she feels quite, happy that she is being recognized as a writer. Now, any writer who stays in that particular suite is expected to donate, to make a gift of his or her mm, work, the work for which they might have received a prize or any work for which they are recognized. So she does not have too many copies of her own book. She promises to give a copy after getting it from one of the bookstores in Washington. But before that, she takes a look at the other prize, the books, the books that have been left there by earlier writers who might have stayed like her in the writer's suite, and she notices with a little bit of disappointment that most of these titles are pretty ordinary works, no great literary stuff, no great works, no great names, just ordinary, self-help books and motivation books and books of that sort. There's a little bit of disappointment that she too falls only in that category and that she would not be recognized as a great writer. And then, in that staying in that large, spacious room that night, it's not a very comfortable sleep that she has. On the other hand, she has a kind of dream, the kind of dream that she always has, she says, whenever she travels outside her little town of Lancaster. Whenever she goes away from home, whenever she stays away from home, there's always this dream, this recurring dream. And in the dream, she always sees herself trying to prepare a meal for her guests. But unfortunately, she discovers that there are not enough things in the refrigerator for her to cook a proper meal. So this is a rather disturbing meal. And each time she sees this kind of a dream, she feels disturbed. She knows that some of her friends would interpret it in various ways, about her, the various psychological interpretations that would be given to the dream, but in her own mind she knows that it is only because of this being away from home. I read from the story. Away from home, liberated from my responsibility for meals, my unexpected calculations steal into my dreams and leave me blithering with this diminished store of nourishment and the fact of my unpreparedness. Such a small dream crisis, but I always wake with a sense of terror. So she's so always focused on her homemaking, on cooking meals for her family and for guests and so on, that the moment she goes out of town, this obsessive thought weighs so heavily on her that it definitely comes into her dreams. And she knows that that is what the dream means. So the book events in Washington go rather uneventfully. In no bookshop is there a huge crowd waiting for her to give the author's signature because hardly anybody knows her, and people are really not very interested in discussing the book with her because not many people have read the work. So since the book events go rather uneventfully, she has a lot of time. She has a lot of extra time there, and so she decides to go shopping. This is the big city of Washington, and in that Georgetown area, which is a nice upmarket area, she decides to do some shopping, especially for her daughter Nora. It's Nora's birthday coming up soon, and so she decides to get her a scarf. And she has in her mind a specific kind of scarf. She doesn't want to settle for anything less. She knows Nora quite well. Nora is a girl who has a mind of her own. At a very young age, she had, uh, you know, uh, given signs of a person with an individuality, a personality of her own, a mind of her own. And similarly, therefore, when she wanted to buy a scarf for Nora, she did not want to settle for anything less. She wanted a fine silk scarf, which it should have a particular feel, it should have a particular pattern. It should not be an ordinary scarf at all. You know, uh, Retta Winters herself is not a very fashionable lady. She knows that whenever she tries to wear a scarf, it just falls rather flops down. It does not have a very sophisticated look on her. But she knows that her daughter needs a good a scarf, and therefore she does not want to settle for anything less than what she has in her mind. So she goes into shop after shop, boutique after boutique, in order to look for the right scarf. And even though she does not belong to this place, to this Georgetown area of Washington, the boutique owners understand that here is a woman who has something in mind, and therefore they're quite understanding when she says, no, this is not quite what I have in mind, this is not quite Nora. She begins to talk in that way, and she feels rather good about herself. And it's finally, after having visited at least 20 different shops, that she finally comes across the scarf that she wants for her daughter. It is exactly what she has in mind: the touch, the feel, the pattern, everything about it. So she was very happy when she discovers it. And even though it is $60, which is quite a big amount, she has no hesitation in paying for that, and she does it with great elan. She pays happily for it and walks out feeling very, very happy. And then the next stage of her book tour will take her to Baltimore. At Baltimore, she plans to meet her friend Gwendolyn, one of her old friends. So at Baltimore, when she meets Gwendolyn, she's in for a shock. Gwendolyn looks very, very different. There used to be writers who would get together at Lancaster, when they had a small group of young women writers. Gwendolyn was the unacknowledged leader of the group. Everyone considered her as, the best writer among them. And, she was easily chosen as a leader. But after a particular point of time, she decided to move to another city to become a writer in residence at college, where there was this creative writing course offered. So that is how she left Lancaster, but they had always remained in touch. And whenever one of them got a story published, they would write to each other. But she hadn't received any mail of congratulations after winning the Offended Prize, and therefore Retta was really looking forward to meeting Gwendolyn and telling her about it. But in the first place, Gwendolyn looked very, very different. She was dressed in a very strange sort of way, with loads of, cloth on her, layers of cloth, and then some material over her head as well. Initially, Retta thought that she probably was recovering from chemotherapy and that she'd lost her hair and so on. But she came to know that that was not the case. It was just that Gwendolyn, who always used to wear a jeans and t-shirt earlier, now looks, and dresses in a very different way. She also notices that there is a rather sad look about her. Gradually, she learns more about Gwendolyn, that uh, she had not really made it very big as a writer. Uh, the post that she held as a writer in residence had not appeared to be very successful. She had fallen in love with a very young student, and that boy had put her through a lot of agony for his sake. She had reached a level where she would do anything at all for him. She had even done plastic surgery to seal off her navel, because he could not tolerate, he said, the smell. And she'd really done the unbelievable in order to make him happy. But after some time, he went his own way, and then she was left with no alternative but to recreate her uh, navel. It's her way of regaining her own identity. She goes back to her maiden name and so on. So altogether, life had not been all that pleasant for Gwendolyn. And Retta is also rather sad and surprised that Gwendolen does not mention the offended prize or congratulate her for it. So somehow she has to bring that up into the discussion, and then she begins to talk about some plans that she has to remodel her house, and for which she says the money that she got as part of uh, the price, or as part of the offended price, would be very useful. And that is when Gwendolen acknowledges it. She says, "Oh yes, the offended price, the beginning, middle, and end, is it?" She seems to convey the idea that, oh, it was after all for a rather ordinary work that you got the prize, or the prize itself was only given for ordinary works. She does not make, she does not really congratulate Rita for on the prize, and she somehow dismisses it as a rather unimportant prize. And then, Rita has to search for another topic for discussion, and that is when she brings up the topic of the scarf. She tells Gwendolen in detail about her shopping expedition, about the time that she spent, about the kind of scarf that she wanted, and the 20 odd shops that she had visited until she finally saw the scarf that she wanted to buy. And then she takes it out of her bag and shows it to Gwendolen. And very surprisingly, Gwendolen just presses the scarf to her face and folds it neatly, puts it back in its paper cover, and then puts it into her bag, probably under the impression that it was for her that her friend Rita had done, or done that shopping, to give her the gift. Rita, of course, hadn't mentioned her daughter Nora. She just said that she had gone shopping for a scarf. And here is Gwendolen, who believes that this is a gift, and she's so touched, she's so overwhelmed, she's moved to tears by this gift. It seems as if she's looking for a kind of recognition, the kind of recognition and love that she hadn't probably been receiving for so long, and she stumbles into believing that that is what Rita has come to her with. And with a great deal of joy, she keeps the scarf in her own bag. So now we come to the last part of the story. We have seen how Gwendolen accepts the scarf from Rita, almost as if it's a gift given to her by Rita. But we know that it was actually something else for Rita. It was a gift for her daughter. But when we put the situations here together, we realize that this is a very touching moment for Gwendolen, a person who has been probably looking for affection, attention, and a person whose dreams had not really been fulfilled. And therefore, when she sees this scarf, her heart goes all out, and she, just wants to believe probably that it is a gift that her friend Rita had got for her. And then she makes a very uh, important or significant statement about it, which actually acts like an epiphany to Rita. An epiphany is something that reveals something. So this statement made by Gwendolen, it suddenly flashes many messages into Rita's mind. So what does Gwendolen say? She says, she just holds the scarf against her face and says, "It's just so beautiful. Finding it, it's almost like you made it. You invented it, created it out of your imagination." That one statement coming from a fellow writer is a very illuminating line for Rita. She realizes then that the love and care that she had put into the act of shopping for a scarf for her daughter Nora was in no way different from her own act of writing. We know that she wrote from her domestic experiences. She wrote from her everyday experiences. And there is really no difference between her life, her everyday routine, her family, her domestic surroundings, and her act of writing. They comprise and compose each other. They are one and the same. And that is why this act of shopping for that scarf is no different from the way she writes. In exactly the same way that she looks for the right word, the right image, the right metaphor to fit into her works, she has gone about searching for the books. And that reveals her so much more about her act of writing, the challenges that she faces as a writer, the time that she, somehow manages to find in between her domestic routine and so on. That is what you find in the last part of the story. I watched her roll the scarf back into the fragile paper. She took her time, tucking in the edges with her fingertips, and then she slipped the parcel into her plastic bag, tears spilling more freely now. Thank you, darling Rita. Thank you. You don't know what you have given me today. And in her mind, Rita says, oh, yes, I did. I did. I learned so much about my friend Gwendolyn and about me and about all the women like us, who want to write, who dream of writing, who dream of becoming writers. But what does it amount to? A scarf, half an ounce of silk, maybe less. It maybe is a very little thing, a small little thing which weighs even less, floating free in the world. I looked at Gwendolyn, my old friend, and then down at my hands, my wedding band, my engagement ring, a little diamond thingamajig from the 60s. I thought of my 3 daughters and my mother-in-law and my own dead mother, when her slack charms and the need she had to relax by painting china. The whole, um, what shall you say, canvas of women, women who want to do something for themselves. Uh, it emerges in her mind. Like she wanted to write, but there were many a challenge that came in the way of her career as a writer. Her wedding, for instance, it did pose many a stumbling block for her, as it did for her mother too, who wanted to be an artist, who painted pottery, China pottery, but again, who would probably have found that difficult to find time for her painting amidst her routine. Not one of us was going to get what we wanted, in exactly the way that Gwen did not know what she really wanted and, did not know how to ask for it. She realizes how that conveys so much about the problems that women face when it comes to creating um, a career in the arts, in the creative arts for themselves. Imagine someone writing a play called Death of a Saleswoman. The reference, of course, is to Arthur Miller's famous play, Death of a Salesman. Now, it is about a failed salesman named Willie Loman. Uh, it does not really tell you about the achievements of a heroic person. It is in fact about a person who was a failure, but still it is considered as a classic of American drama. Why? In that one moment, Rita Winters realizes that it is recognized as a classic mainly because of the fact that it is written by a man. If it had been written by a woman, it would have been considered as a trivial work. What a joke it would have been if it had been called Death of a Saleswoman. That is not considered as mainstream in the world. The world has this habit of deciding what is important, what is significant, what can be considered great, what can be considered as mainstream, what can be considered as a classic, and so on. And whatever belongs to the domestic world, whatever belongs to the everyday, ordinary lives of ordinary women, that would never ever merit the status of a classic. What a joke it would be if someone wrote a play called, if a woman wrote a play called Death of a Saleswoman. We are so transparently in need of shoring up our little preciosities and our lisping pronouns. Her, she, women, it is not a very easy task for them to write what they know best. They're very um, conscious about it. It becomes a matter of great concern to them, or it's a big question mark to them each time they want to write something. When they write from their own experience, they are all too aware of the fact that the world is only likely to brush it aside as ordinary, as not up to the mark, as not truly great literature. We ask ourselves questions endlessly, but not nearly sternly enough. We do not have it in us to be sure, to be convinced about ourselves, about our writing, about the themes that we choose. We are not stern enough. We do not ask questions sternly enough. We do not ask ourselves, why shouldn't I write this? Why shouldn't I write about what I know best? That kind of conviction is something that the women are conditioned to lack. The world isn't ready for us yet. It hurts me to say that. She's aware of the fact that the world is not yet, ready to accept women who write about that which they know best. We're too soft in our tissues. Even you, Danielle Westerman, she addresses that line to the writer Danielle Westerman, Holocaust survivor, cynic, and genius. She is considered as a writer. Why? Because she has been a Holocaust survivor, and she writes about war and themes that the world would consider as important. Whereas people like Mrs. Winters, they haven't had that kind of experience, and naturally they are made to believe that whatever they write would lack greatness. Even you, Mrs. Winters, with your new, old, useless knowledge, we are made to believe by the world that what we have at our disposal is old, useless knowledge. Even a person like Danielle Westerman would have had to struggle. It would have been a big challenge for her to make it big as a writer. We are too kind, too willing, too unwilling to, reaching out blindly with a grasping hand, but not knowing how to ask for what we don't even know we want. So it is that lack of conviction, it is that lack of confidence, it is that lack of that cocksureness, that aggressive kind of edge, which somehow the world grants to men, because of the kind of opportunities that they have, because of the kind of, being more out in the world, being more exposed to so much more. So what a man undergoes and what a man therefore expresses through his works would always be considered as worthy of being written about, of being read about. Think of any great work of literature. Think of the plays of Shakespeare. Think of the plays of the Greek theatre. All of them always considered, the male protagonist as, somebody whose problems are worth discussing. They would only have considered the problem of a Hamlet as significant, never that of Ophelia. The problem of an Othello, the problem of a King Lear, these are significant, not that of the women, either in Oedipus Rex's life, or in Hamlet's life, or in King Lear's life, or in Macbeth's life. So that is the way of the world. And Retta Winters realizes in that one moment, in that one brief moment, which is so touching and which is so painful to both the women there, how difficult it is for women to gain recognition as writers. But uh, you know, that is where the beauty of the story lies. In spite of that awareness, here is somebody who has um, remained true to herself and written what she knows best. She has not been cowed down by the mainstream. She has not been suppressed by the norms and the demands of the world. The world outside has probably moved on and discovered new ways of writing, and the world outside is probably impatient with conventional novels that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. അതൊന്നും അല്ല ഗ്രേറ്റ് എന്നായിരിക്കും ലോകം പറയുന്നത്. But still, if she has remained true to herself, that is actually some kind of a victory. I think that is where one can feel justified about looking at this story as a post-colonial story. This is a story that is prescribed for you in the post-colonial writing section. Of course, it is written by a writer who moved to Canada and who was recognized as a Canadian writer. Canada was also at one point of time a colony of European countries like Britain and France, and we are talking about a person who's trying to contribute to the mainstream, to the English canon as a Canadian writer. That is one level of it being a post-colonial work. At another level, we are talking about a woman's attempt to make herself heard, to gain recognition as a writer in a world that is so predominated by the mainstream composed of male writers. So just as the colonizer, just as it is so difficult for the colonized people to be heard when the colonizer's influence is so strong, here is a woman who also struggles, like other women writers, to be heard, to be recognized as a writer against that, the center, the dominance, the mainstream of the male literary canon. Okay, so that is what makes the story significant. Carol Ann Shields is worth reading as a writer because she can give insights into her world in a way that no one else can. This world is what she knows best, and that is what she feels gracefully confident enough to write about. She has her own reservations. She has her own apprehensions. She has her own fears, and she has her own diffidence regarding how all this will be accepted. But that doesn't mean that she should, go after some kind of artificiality and try to match up to the demands of a world, the demands that she would not be able to meet. ലോകം ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്ന രീതിയിൽ എഴുതുക എന്നല്ല, എനിക്ക് അറിയുന്ന രീതിയിൽ എഴുതുക. In being true to herself, in being true to her own experiences, she thus emerges as a post-colonial writer who writes, who feels confident enough, who gracefully accepts her own world as her subject matter. Okay? So please read the story yourself and try to read between the lines and look for a critical assessment make a critical assessment of the story.